We have with us four longstanding, talented, and important professors at Linfield. Brenda DeVore Marshall is at my farthest to my right, your left. Tom Love, Peter Richardson, and Barbara Seidman, who is closest to me. And I'm going to ask them really to introduce themselves as we begin this conversation. My first question actually is to ask why they came to Linfield and why they stayed. And so maybe we can begin by asking, when did you come to Linfield? Why did you come to Linfield? And why did you stay? And I'd like to begin with Brenda.
Good morning. I came to Linfield in the fall of 1987, and to be quite honest, Ty and I came to Linfield at the same time, and we came because we were each offered a job at Linfield. Honest truth. But we also liked it. It's very interesting. A couple of years before we were hired, we had taken probably our first vacation that we did not visit parents and had driven to Oregon. And we were living in Wyoming at the time, and we decided that if we ever left Wyoming, this would be a really wonderful place to come to. And but we didn't think we'd leave Wyoming. I also have a cousin who had graduated from Linfield, so I knew about it a little bit. So that's why we came. Why did we stay? We really came thinking that we would probably be loading the yellow Ryder truck in about 3 years, because early in our careers, that's what we were doing. And lo and behold, we both fell in love with Linfield, and were lucky enough for Linfield to say to us, yes, you may stay. I think we both wanted, having worked at larger institutions and smaller institutions, we really both wanted to be at a small institution where we felt like we could know our students and our colleagues, and felt like we might be able to make a difference and contribute to the lives of everyone in the community.
Tom Love, anthropology, and I came in the middle of the 82-83 academic year, and so my arrival was unheralded, shall we say. Let's not go farther on that one, but I came to Linfield for a variety of reasons. Jack Hellie was the then dean, and I used to say, Barbara, you were Jack's last hire, but she reminds me with her steel trap memory that, no, I was. And Jack had come from Pomona and was a Latin American scholar, and I could see immediately was an effective leader, and just I was very attracted to that. I turned out to be his last hire because he died a year later. Charlie Walker, then president, had come from McAllister, Hamlin, and seemed to be effectively leading the college out of a somewhat darker period financially. Peter Richardson, Peter, and Mike Roberts, recently arrived from Yale, were on the search committee. My soon-to-be colleague in anthropology was Joel Morant, was clearly well-trained, and so I was attracted to the strong intellectual community and these very credentialed people around me, impressive people. Also, I'm from Oregon, so born here, although raised over in Idaho. And so it felt like coming home. I always thought of myself as from Western Oregon, and to be at a liberal arts college in Oregon was just like, oh my gosh, this is too good, and I needed a job. So it all added up. I was delighted. I of course, stayed here, and it's been wonderful for all the reasons that we'll be, I think, outlining here as we go along. But losing Jack Hellie was a big blow. He died within a year from a medical procedure that went wrong, and also as a few years in, I realized, came to realize how threadbare the resources for faculty development were, and that was challenging. But I stayed because I'd put down roots, and I could see ways forward to develop professionally, as well as, of course, work closely with students, for their benefit in a variety of ways, and that has certainly come true in ways that perhaps we'll explore a little bit more.
Peter?
Peter Richardson, good morning. I came in 1980, and again, Jack Hellie was in his prime at that time, and I was tremendously impressed by him. My wife and I had been living in Connecticut at the time, and for some years, with our two girls growing up, we had realized that we did not want them growing up in the shadow of New York City. We didn't want them acting that way. So we began to look, and it was very easy to consider the Northwest because my mother was third generation in Portland. I remembered being out here starting in the late 40s to visit my grandparents. And I'd been here on field trips with my father and had come out any number of times and knew pretty much what was here. So our sights had always been fixed in the Northwest. We took a trip in 1966 around the country, and it was very easy to say when we were here, this looks just fine. The year I came, there were 4 positions that I had applied for. 5 positions, no, 4, excuse me. One was in Maine. It was an associate deanship of the graduate school at the University of Maine. One was the department head in Western Kentucky. And then there was a position at Willamette, and then there was a position at Linfield. And those are the ones to which I applied. The one that came open at UCLA was, as my colleagues back east were telling me, written for me because it was half undergraduate, half graduate teaching, combination of Latin and medieval German and so on. It'd be perfect. But then we have the city problem again, so here we are. We have loved it. We've loved every bit of it. The department has managed to grow from the 3 people that we had originally to 9. Let's see, what else should I say there? Oh yes, when I applied for the job, the job announcement said that they were looking for somebody to teach 2 modern languages. No, excuse me, 2 languages. And I thought, well, that'll be fine. I'll work on my French and get that up. So I did work on it very hard. And so when I applied, Linfield thought it was getting somebody for French and somebody for German. But when I arrived and I looked around and actually read the course catalog, I realized there was no Latin here, which just astonished me. And so I went to see Jack Hellie, and I said, what if we changed the French part to Latin? How would that be? He said, you're on. There we are. This is how Latin came back to Linfield. Of course, it had been here for many years, long before that, but it had died out here. Let's see. Why did we stay? Just because it is the place that it is. I won't do any more than that.
I came in great part because of the person to my right, Peter Richardson. I didn't realize he had been on the search committee that Tom was part of. I was on the search committee for Brenda's and Ty's positions, as a matter of fact. Right.
Gets incestuous.
So it is indeed. I don't think Debbie intended it that way. I can't claim that I knew anything about Linfield, and my first real focus on Oregon happened when Mount St. Helens blew up, and I was a graduate student at the University of Illinois and was looking at it on television and thinking how far away Oregon was. And I'm sure I didn't say Oregon at the time, I'm sure I said Oregon. We come to be in Oregon, however, in part because as a graduate student at the University of Illinois, I knew that my passion was as a teacher. I had my first job in Kentucky at a small liberal arts college and loved it. I could have stayed, but for a variety of reasons, I decided to rejoin my husband, who was a new attorney in San Francisco, because we had 2 degrees that we completed at the same time, and we had jobs 3,000 miles apart. And we took them, and then I went to San Francisco with the understanding that we would look for jobs on the West Coast, because we understood within the first summer that we were in this West Coast nexus, that we were Westerners, our hearts were out here. And within 9 months, I was offered the job by Jack Housley's successor, Ken Williams, and called Scott back in San Francisco and started to cry because I said, now I've got the job, what do we do? And we loved San Francisco. But we also knew it took a lot of energy, and our aspirations for a family would be complicated. So he worked his connections through his firm, and he was offered a job within, I don't know, about 8 weeks of mine, and we moved up in the summer of 1983, which means Tom Love will always be here longer than I have been here by only a few months, and he takes advantage of that. It has been a perfect job for me, and I've stayed because it has been such a rich teaching environment. Like everybody else has said, the people I met on my interview when I was on campus, including someone who has been gone from Linfield, not gone from the planet, but gone from Linfield for a long time, Stephen Wolf, Ken Erickson, who was the chair of my department, and picked me up at the airport that April in 1983. They were wonderful people. It was a small department at the time. There were 5 of us. I was the Americanist, and the experience of being able to teach the whole U.S. survey was actually something I hadn't anticipated being able to do, and I was delighted by that. I was able to teach my subfields in gender studies, now as it's called, women's studies then, and I was able to continue my passion of teaching a film class every couple of years, and almost immediately partnered up with Will Lingle in mass communications to offer a history of film class every 2 years, which I taught with him all through my time at Linfield, which is now in its 35th year, until he had the audacity to retire before I did. And I'm still teaching a film course and reference him all the time, but not with Will anymore. He's fine, he's in Portland, so I don't, whenever I say so-and-so's gone, I don't mean it the way it sounds. You know, they are with us. It has been a tremendous experience for me, not only because of the teaching opportunities and the wealth of different teaching opportunities, but because I was also given a chance to spread my administrative wings. And under Marv Henberg, I was the first college faculty associate dean, which I did for 6 years. I had a great mentor in Marv, certainly, and Vivian, who is there in the second row, great mentors for me. And I learned a great deal, and went back to the English department, and then we had a power transition, or leadership transition, I should say, and Tom Hellie became our president, but Marv stepped into that role, and he came back to the English department one day and said, Barbara, I've told the board I will accept their invitation to be acting president until the hiring achieves our new presidency, if you'll come back and be the dean of faculty. And so I said, well, I have to talk to Scott, but yes, I will. I ultimately agreed to do that, and that was a tremendous experience as well. So Linfield is giving me a lot of opportunities to keep expanding my skill set, my knowledge base, my sense of the world. And then I came back to the English department as Tom became president. I served with Tom for a while, and then we, of course, went to the hiring of new personnel in the academic affairs office. And in the English department, I've been the department chair for the last 6 years, and so I've had a little bit of both teaching and certainly a lot of teaching and some administration. And so I keep being able to blend those two, and I've enjoyed it quite a bit. My 2 sons have been born in Oregon. I am thrilled that I have children who are Oregonians, having not known anything about Oregon before I stepped foot here. It's been a wonderful career for me, and I will be retiring at the end of this year with great enthusiasm about what Linfield has made possible for me.
Thank you. Obviously, we have 4 professors here who care deeply about the college and also have a long tenure at the institution. And I think it would be very interesting to hear from you about what you think has changed most at the college and what has stayed more or less the same. And I think we'll begin with Tom this time and come around.
Okay. Of course, this is a big question, and Barbara and I were actually kicking this around on the drive down. Oh, I'm sorry. I did want to say that we had and we have an excellent faculty, and just an anecdote that illustrates that. I think all of us have served on pretty much every committee, right, in the in the whole structure, even as that changes sometimes. The one committee I never wanted to serve on was promotion and tenure. You know, you're making some tough calls on colleagues and sometimes friends, right? And so finally, my colleague, now Hillary Crane, kind of talked me into this. Anyway, I agreed to serve. Okay, anyway, so I'm in the fourth year of 4 years on this committee now. I couldn't have been more wrong, because it's given me a vantage point on the faculty particularly, but on the institution that's unparalleled. And so we sit here, I would sit here and say, yeah, we have a great faculty. I know it now, because I've looked deeply into people's files, and there's not a dud in the bunch, I can tell you. We've got a terrific faculty, younger faculty coming up as well, or especially, I should say. We've always been aspirational, I think, as a faculty, and so that produces certain frictions, I suppose. We always want more than we can have. Our reach exceeds our grasp financially and programmatically. We're certainly in better financial shape now. That's something that's changed than we were then. I think what's really stayed the same is the caliber of the people in this community. Really from top to bottom. We were joking beforehand about the grounds staff, right? And there's this sense, and all of you feel this as well in your various positions in the college, you know, from the grounds people to the dining commons people to you know, the carpenters, it just on and on, the administrative staff, just people are friendly, they're competent. It's really a marvelous community to be a part of. One thing that's changed, I'll just say, is the number of faculty, especially, that live in Portland and commute. That was already an issue when I was arriving, and we lived, in fact, we rented a house from Peter for a year and a half, lived next to campus here.
Slumlord. Yeah.
Slumlord. Your word, not mine, Peter. And moved to Portland because, like so many of us, you know, spouses, you know, employment options are just so much greater there. So we've lived a commuting life, and that's not something I had imagined. I have not, therefore, had the opportunity to, you know, the sort of the idyllic small town college and students over for, you know, for dinner, or that's sort of intimacy which I wish I would have had, but wasn't able to, at least in that way, right? And so I think the sort of the pressures, cultural and economic, on two-earner households have eroded the sense of community a little bit. I don't think it's, well, it's eroded a bit. So that's, I think, what my thoughts, yeah.
Thank you, Tom. Peter, do you have anything that you would care to add?
Yeah, I'm glad that Tom mentioned the business of faculty moving to Portland. Many, those of you who are here probably remember when Frank and Helene Nelson lived here on campus, near where the sculpture fountain is right now, the students. In fact, many faculty still do live in McMinnville, and many younger faculty. So we have young families that are allied to the college who are here and are able to take over and invite people over to their houses and so on and so forth. Beverly and I have lived here since the very beginning. We were here for 2 years, just a block from the college, and now we've moved up into the woods, up in the snow country up there, where on the way down, my neighbor told me they'd just seen a mountain lion, but I made it anyway.
Today, anyway.
Let's see, today I'll make it, that's right. What has stayed the same, the faculty, as you all know, have taught everywhere, around the world even, and we've all come here because we have a very deep and earnest belief in this place and the kind of education that we provide for our students. You just don't hear of people coming and saying, this doesn't feel right, this is not education, blah, blah, I'm going somewhere else. It's not, quote, quote, the Linfield way, I guess. It's not, please come here and thou shalt stay, but it's that we want to stay. So that has stayed the same, although I have to say in these search committees, we've gone into each search committee with the mandate to make us better than we already are. And I think every search committee thinks about that way. And I'm delighted to say that in my department, that's the way things have gone. I mentioned earlier, there were 3 of us at the very beginning. And we're far better now than we were. We're really able to serve these students, especially in their goals to study abroad and learn other languages and so forth. Things have changed. The college was smaller. There were fewer students. We were about 1,250, I think, when I came. McMinnville was 13,000 people. The increased size has inevitably meant that structures are a bit more complicated. There are perhaps more hoops to jump through. Accreditation is, we think about it a good deal more. There are federal mandates that we didn't have back in the days when we, so that's a bit easier. And with that, I'll pass it over to Barbara.
In addition to a larger student body, we have a campus that's twice as big as it was when I came in 1983. And again, I look at Vivian and know how much Vivian had to do with that. The facilities are better. I mean, starting with the library, this room itself went through a significant renovation in the, I don't know, was it
2006 and
I
7.
knew you would know the year. Under Tom's leadership and the continuing steps put in place by Vivian and Marv, the library is something we dreamed into being, I think, and very pleased about that growth. In terms of the student body, I see one of my students there at one of the machines, a former student, now an alumna, Sarah. And so I say this to you, Sarah, and to all the students out there who may be listening to this in some way. The Linfield student is still as earnest and committed to her or his education, I think, as has ever been the case. I think they come with more stresses than they did in 83 when I arrived. Stresses on the home front, financial stresses. I'm struck by how many of them have very complex working lives. In addition to their classroom commitments. And we're a very much more diverse student body and faculty than we were at those times, and our curriculum has evolved as well. In my own department, we have courses explicitly, for example, in post-colonial literature, which would not have been the case, courses that deal with race and ethnicity, that might not have been foregrounded in the title in the way that we do now. When I first came, one of my goals was not only to create an intro to film class, but a women writers class, which we've now institutionalized in our department. For the first time ever this fall, we have a full class, enrolled class devoted to LGBTQIA students, or not students, to literature. So it's been wonderful to see that kind of expansion, and that's happened across curricula in the department, or in the departments at the college. The liberal arts vision has stayed the same, and the commitment to seeing everything that we do through that liberal arts prism, I think, is still very valuable, and we see that effect again and again when because I live in Portland and all of my physicians are up there and my family's physicians, again and again I have nurses tell me, and physicians, there's something distinctive and unique about those Linfield nursing graduates. Their critical thinking is something that sets them apart, and I see that as a direct result of their liberal arts training. The fact that we have these continuing shifts in our relationship between the two campuses, that is different from when I came, which was very quick after the acquisition of the Good Samaritan School of Nursing. So that's changed. So I think that's probably plenty.
Brenda, anything that you would like to add?
Well, I'll sound like my students sometimes, everything they just said. But I'll add a couple of things. I think one of the things that's changed certainly in the world, and Linfield is part of that world, is technology. When I first arrived at Linfield, and I'm the late arrival here, so I know the others experienced this as well, we had a college phone operator, and you could only call into the college number. And so we did have phones on our desks, but they really weren't very useful except for calling out, because most of the time we would get a message that we might get a day or two later. And when I first came, I was the director of forensics, and so I would be trying to run speech and debate tournaments. And coaches are trying to call in to change their entries and things the night before the tournament. So we worked out a system that for certain hours, if they needed to make changes, this of course is pre-email, although it came a little later, they would call my home, and Ty would run messages to me as I was working at my office here. So to be in a world in which we have almost instant connection literally across the world has made significant, I think, changes in how we operate, but more importantly about how we think about our place in the world and how our students think about our place in the world. We are not isolated in terms of technology, and so we therefore are also not isolated in terms of our thinking about the world. So I think that change has been wonderful. I would echo everyone else's talk or comments about the faculty and about the students. I would also echo Barbara's thought about diversity. I think that's one of the things I'm most proud of, sort of looking at another question, would be my role in helping to provide a liberal arts focus through various disciplines on the issue of diversity in our world. And I'm proud, and hopefully I have contributed positively to that.
Thank you. Each of the four people who are sitting here has obviously been a faculty member at Linfield for a long time. As you know, I think, when I visit alumni literally around the world, I often ask them to name faculty or other individuals, for that matter, who had a particularly important impact on their lives. Each of these four people has been mentioned many times, and I'm not just saying that because they're on stage. It's true. And so I could tell stories about them, most of which they would like, all of which they would like, actually. But I'd rather that they tell their stories. And Barbara mentioned just a minute ago that as she was talking about what has remained the same and what has changed, she talked about how students continue to have the kind of earnest, curious nature that they had even when she first arrived, and how other things may have changed, and that there may be more pressure and more stresses that our students bear now than they once did in what at least seemed like a more innocent period. I would like to ask, beginning with Peter, I would like to ask each of you to comment a little bit, if you wish, on how students are the same or have changed. And then I would like you to give an example of at least one student that you particularly knew or know, and how you've seen them develop thanks to their time at Linfield. So Peter, would you begin? And then we'll continue with Barbara and then come around.
The students, when you were here, the students were all earnest, I'm sure. They still are. They come ready to learn, which I think I cannot say about students everywhere. They have a good idea that this will have something significant to do with the rest of their lives, although some students frame it with the words, I came here so that I could get a job. And as we talk, they realize that that wasn't really what they should have said. I tell them they need to think about their lives as having careers and not jobs, and about them as being able to add to the glory of the human community. One thing that is quite different these days is that they are set upon, as Barbara said, they're set upon from all sides. There are work problems, but one enormous problem, which most students would say, I suppose, is a benefit, is our friend the internet. Our students are attached to those things. I think around the country, they say something like 7 hours a day. And if you think back to your time at Linfield, what could you have done with an extra 7 hours each day? I wonder that as well. So we have to do some fancy stepping from time to time to get our students to actually do all the homework that is assigned. They do grow into that, they learn how to do it, and I'm happy for them. But I do worry about this part of the world that is not being terribly kind to them. When they wake up in the morning, they must be thinking, who will be the first person to try to sell me something today? And I don't want them to be thinking about us faculty as they think that. As far as students who have changed, goodness, there are so many over the years. I can say a group of students. We have in our department the requirement that our majors in a language spend a year abroad and study in the language that they have learned here at Linfield. And so we see these students as freshmen and sophomores. We work with them. We do not see them as juniors. And behold, we see them as they come back senior year. And I have the great joy of teaching a senior seminar that brings together all of these students from each language group. And we try to figure out what in the world this country is that they have moved back into, because they don't recognize it. They don't recognize, in many ways, the campus. They don't recognize what their place is in the world as carefully as they might. They feel really between two worlds. And so this is an extremely beneficial course. I think it's a difficult one. There are tears. They know from the very beginning that the door is closed and that what comes up in that room stays in that room. They grow together very significantly. They share their experience living abroad, and somehow we do manage to work out what actually happened when they lived abroad and what is actually happening now in this country and how that all fits into the lives that they lead from here on. I tell them at the beginning of the course, it's like the swimming pool cleaners that I have seen. I don't have a pool there. But these things that sweep around aimlessly or around a swimming pool, and in time, the whole thing gets swept. So I tell them in time, throughout this entire semester, everything that you have been thinking about and worrying about and so forth will have been addressed. And I'm hoping satisfactorily. So that is certainly one thing that I think of first in this regard.
Peter spoke about the internet. The way I frame it has been influenced by what my sociology and anthropology faculty have taught me about the vocabulary they use, and Tom and I were speaking about this morning. What I find today is students don't come with quite the amount of cultural capital that having all that access provides. And I've been giving a lot of thought to this question, and why do I think it is that in an era that has so much available to them, as I tell them, you've got this little computer in your hand while you're reading. You can look up whatever you need to right there. Amazing. But they don't do it typically. And I think that there's a kind of defensive mechanism as well that narrows things down to digestible material that has some immediate relevance to their own lives. And I think that translates into what the culture generally might see as excessive narcissism, but also, as I said to Tom, those of us who are children of the 60s hardly have anything to criticize in that regard because there's some legacy going on here. But I had a freshman tell me a few days ago, who's in my inquiry seminar, that she doesn't think she has ever read a complete book in her life until the first book in my class. And she was very happy about the book she'd read, so I don't mean that was a criticism, but it was an interesting observation for her to make. So I think there's some of that. They don't come with, and on the other hand, I have to also say that the best students I have are as good as any student I've ever had. And so perhaps the gap is the disparity between the levels of cultural capital that they might bring in. But then again, they come in receptive and see a context. The student I've selected to think about in regard to Tom's second question is a student named Monica. She was a graduate in the 90s. I spent some time with her this summer because she comes back to campus pretty regularly. She came interested in Linfield. I met her before she decided on her college. She's Minnesotan. I think you know Monica. And she studied literature, but she also studied French. And in her junior year, it was sophomore or junior year, went to Senegal and learned Wolof while she was there and came back. She left Linfield having engaged a wide variety of subject matters, very inquisitive, very bright, very committed, has now been working for several years in social justice, youth organizations in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, and is completing a master's in social work. She just published her first academic source article about which she feels very conflicted because she recognizes ivory tower versus grassroots, which am I really? And she is, I think, the example of what Linfield does the best, but she's not the only example. I could name 5 or 6 other students who went in other directions who show the same kind of variousness of interests and passions and have succeeded beyond her wildest dreams when she walked through that door as a first-year student.
Thank you. Brenda?
I think one of the things that has stayed the same with Linfield students is that by and large and almost 100%, Linfield students are really good people. They are good at heart. They think, sometimes they come to us thinking mostly about themselves, but it doesn't take very long for them to begin to expand that universe and to find their place in the world that focuses beyond themselves. And the change is in how they sort of come to understand that, perhaps, but when my colleagues from other places around the country talk about students, I think this is the one thing that I've been able to say consistently for now beginning 31 years, that they're really good people. And I would say that about my colleagues and everyone who works for and with Linfield as well. I would echo much of what has been said. I seem to be saying that a lot, but the student I'm going to choose to talk about, and this is a very difficult question, Tom, because immediately I think about 10 names flashed through my head, and then you know, where do you go? But I think I'll talk about a student who was actually a junior when I arrived at Linfield. She was completing a major in speech, which had actually then been dropped. So I was completing a couple of majors and then facing not having a major. That lasted for a while, and then we got it back. But the student, whose name is Aaron, was completing the major and was a member of the speech and debate team. And when the first day of the speech and debate team meeting, there were 5 people there, 3 women and 2 men. I walked in, the 2 men got up and left. The 3 women did stay, and from that we rebuilt the very illustrative and long-lived Linfield forensics team. And so she stuck with me, which I always appreciated, and she was very good. And we talked a lot, she was here, about what would she do with a degree in speech, and about what she thought about the world. And one of the things she kept asking me was, why are there so few women leaders in the world? And to which I didn't really have a very good answer, except to say I realized that, and that I hoped in small ways to be able to illustrate that women could lead. And it's what I've tried to do as a mentor and a colleague. So we spent a lot of time. I developed for her and I think maybe 3 or 4 other students sort of a special topics course in women political leaders, which eventually became the basis for some of my work in gender studies and feminist theory and the development of those classes as part of our regular curriculum. So Erin went on to graduate, and I'm happy to say that since graduation, she has found a way to be involved in her community, in terms of community engagement, and in politics. She served on Portland suburb on their city council for 8 years, made a major difference in that city in all sorts of ways. She's the director of the city's education foundation, where she makes tremendous difference and contributions to that city in one of the most diverse cities in the Portland metro area. In that school district, I think it's over 50 some odd languages spoken in that particular school district. She has run for office a couple of times. She ran for state representative and encountered what we had talked about in class in terms of the negativity that is aimed at women when they run for office. She recently ran for mayor of this particular city, and once again, I'm sorry to say, only a couple of years ago, encountered that same kind of backlash before. And even though she lost both of those elections, she has not lost hope. She continues to encourage both men and women, to run for office, to become involved in politics in order to make a difference in their communities. And so I think Erin stands out, and there are many more for me.
I know Erin, actually. She sent her son here to be a student. I think he graduated last year or the year before. And Erin, a couple of years ago, gave the most memorable, short but memorable speech that we've ever had by a parent at the opening convocation. We always have a member of the Parents' Council welcome the families of the students who are about to begin at Linfield. And we see what the remarks are going to be at the beginning. So I was a little surprised when she came to the front and was standing right in front of me at the microphone and looked down at Tom Love and said, "I met my husband in Dr. Love's class." And most people in the audience did not know what Dr. Love meant exactly. But it was a quintessential Linfield moment, I thought. So Tom, would you tell us about another student?
Sure. Well, echoing Brenda, all of the above. But I thought maybe just a little levity here in terms of student memories of students, because I mean, oh my gosh, so many examples. I mean, Teresa Betancourt. Of course, now I'm long in the tooth enough that they're coming back as accomplished commencement speakers, and it's like, oh, well. So the students earnest and well, they typically are well-grounded, but it was Barbara, to give her credit here, I think, that made the astute observation about how well we do by kids from small towns, first generation, who don't have a lot of cultural capital, but they can thrive in a place like Linfield. That's been very much at the heart of my experience, and I think what we do best. Close interaction with dedicated faculty. But of course that can take some twists and turns and some quirky students along the ways, because I immediately think Peter's going to start laughing, and maybe Barbara and Brenda too. The United Arab Emirates contingent who were here for now I can't tell all the stories because it would take too long and they can't be repeated with this company, but anyway, but one is very tender, is Basham, I think was his name, I'm forgetting so many years ago, but kind of a quiet sort of fellow, but was some sort of an elder brother to these guys, this contingent, right, who had their escapades. He comes up to me, he was in a kind of a world geography class I was teaching at the time, and he came up kind of sheepish several weeks in, and he says, "Professor Love, I was wondering if I could miss class on Friday." This wasn't a Muslim religious thing. I said, "Well, I mean, sure, what's up?" And he says, "Well, I'd rather not tell you." I said, "Well, that's okay," and this is privately, right? I said, well, I need to know, right? And he says, well, he's all sheepish. He says, I'm flying to Brunei for the weekend. I said, oh, right. Of course, none of the students would know where Brunei was, but so I said, oh, well, tell me about it, right? Well, his father was, I don't know if related to or at least knew the Sultan of Brunei, who was an avid, or either the Sultan or his son was an avid race car driver. And so he was flying to Brunei to race cars with the Sultan over the weekend, right? I said, okay, I think it's okay if you miss class. That's okay, right? So he comes back and we're chatting, right? And I had thought, he should say something to the class. I thought, no, that's fine. It's okay. I said, well, did you beat him? He says, yes, he did, right? And he explained how he'd taken some shortcut that was daring, and he flew the car over some jump or something. And I thought, okay, this is a new one for me. But those kinds of quirky students, many of them stick in my mind. The student who was going to raise snakes to sell, make a career out of that. I thought, okay, that might work for you, but no, seriously, I did want to say one, if I could to pull up here a little bit, is Caitlin Hansen. I think some of you knew Caitlin, a double major, anthropology and mass comm, who just a sharp, energetic student, avid, excellent photographer, and so we cooked up this plan for her to spend her summer with me on collaborative research down in North Coastal Peru, an ethnobotany project. She did a terrific job, and her senior project then was building a website, which she did for the project, which we very much needed. She did a great job. She's currently working with the Latino Outreach Program in Portland. She was captain of the women's basketball team. She's one of these larger-than-life characters, many of whom stand out, and echoing the caliber of these top students hasn't changed, right? But to me, she exemplifies so many Linfield students. That is to say, they take advantage of the resources that a small college can offer. There are too many students, I think, who come and don't understand the kinds of networks and experience that we all have, right, to offer them. And so those that really take charge and learn to take charge of their own intellectual growth, those are the folks that really, I think, stand out in my mind.
She's an excellent linguistics student, too.
Ah, wow.
Well, and I knew Caitlin too, and I think that these stories and both the affection and the information that these professors have about their students is a hallmark of who we are as an institution and the kind of education and the kind of relationships that we have at this college. So that being said, I guess I will ask a question that all of these people know they're being asked, but it's still sort of a mean question, and that is, first of all, what do you hope people will see as your legacy at Linfield, your legacy? And then, I didn't put it quite this way in the questions I offered you, but what do you hope the future of Linfield will be? So I think it's Barbara's turn to start.
Well, this is, of course, it's on my mind anyway because I am in my last year officially at Linfield. I hope my legacy will be all those folks who have left Linfield as students and are out in the world doing the amazing things that they're doing, and continue to remember the ways in which, as Tom just said, Linfield changed their lives, or at least what they envisioned their lives could be. And that is the single most important legacy. I will say that I'm really proud of that library out there, so I wish it many, many years of beauty. And in addition, the whole arts campus, because I also worked with Brenda and Ty on Ford Hall, and I did not work on the music building at all, but I did work some on the arts building, or the Fine Arts Center. And I'm very proud of that book that Marv and I did, and the ways in which Marv Henberg, who did the research and the significant mapping of the book, but that he asked me to collaborate with him on to get the book into the prose shape that we both wanted. And so I'm very proud of that. I think that will offer something to future generations of folks interested in the history of the college.
Thank you. Brenda?
Such a difficult question in many ways. I think I'll sort of combine legacy, proudest achievements perhaps a little bit in this, but I think my small part in helping move us toward achieving Ford Hall and a new theater, especially for the college, that has really allowed the students in the theater program as well as the faculty to grow, to be able to work in a facility that was intended to be a theater facility. And thanks to so many of you in the audience for having helped make that possible. I mentioned a little bit earlier that I have always felt one of my responsibilities as a faculty member is to be a mentor, particularly for young women, but for young women and young men as well. And in terms of, again, that women can accomplish a lot. So one of the things I'm really proud of was made possible by all of my colleagues, obviously, was having served as the first woman to be the chair of the Faculty Executive Council in terms of a role in faculty governance. And I hope that that provided a message for colleagues and for students about women's need to be, responsibility to be involved as leaders, if indeed I was able to be successful in doing that. So I think those two things. And again, I hope I will be remembered as a faculty member who took great joy in being in the classroom.
Okay, Tom?
Hard to follow that, and I hope that I have, in my teaching and my professional work, advanced an awareness in my students especially, but in colleagues and everybody I interact with, that we're one species, and despite our cultural linguistic differences, that finally we're earthlings, and that we simply must grasp that, because we're on the cusp of enormous social changes, epical social changes, I think, that are just ahead, and we need the most skilled, well-rounded, critically thinking people possible to manage the transition that's upon us. And a small college has been a wonderful place to advance that.
Thank you. And Peter?
Well, I have the easiest role on this one because I can, excuse me, I can very quickly say ditto. I think you all can sense the joy that I have felt having watched each of these young people come and move into faculty, take faculty positions, and really bring this college forward with a rush. I would say as my legacy, I'll just leave it with one word. It's the students. And you've all said that, and this is why we're all here. As far as where the college should go, what direction it should take, I hope we stay the course. I hope we can remain what we all deeply feel is a liberal arts tradition, remain a liberal arts school. I don't want us to go the easy way of becoming a place where students come to prepare for one job, but where they learn how to grow into their adult selves and move into the world as productive citizens. I think that's a very hard job, but we on the faculty are working very hard at it, and I know that Tom and his team are working very hard at it, and I'm hoping very much that the next team that comes in here will do the same.
I think it's clear to anyone who knows Linfield that these are four of Linfield's many great professors, but they are four great professors who have affected the lives of many and will continue to affect the lives of many. And indeed, I think that your legacies are multiple, but without question, the students' lives that you have touched and the way in which you have sent them out better people than when they came is the most important thing you could have done, and you've done it very well. Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for attending this session.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
song. I'll never forget the time I read a book